This week we are also going to continue developing our bouncing ball. I think this is a great little lesson to just chip away at each week because we're doing it more by sight and more kind of realistically of how we would create an animation. A lot of times I'm giving you numbers to program in and different settings, but with this, the way I'm kind of trying to do it is by looking at what's occurring when you change these values in this composition. So that being said, open up your ball animation, bouncing ball animation. We have a blue perfect circle and we have 3 keyframes of a position, one at the top, one at the bottom, and one at the top again. So what we're going to do in this animation, or in this revision of the animation, is we're going to color this sphere to be more like an actual ball, and then we are going to adjust the anchor of this movement so that we can later on revise some pieces of this sphere to look even more realistic. So right now it's dipping off the screen because the anchor point is not at maybe the base of this sphere, which would be hitting the bottom. So we're going to adjust that. First things first, while the sphere is selected, click on Fill, change it to Radial Gradient, hit OK, and then double click on the color and change these 2 points to a color kind of similar to mine. I want the left color indicator to be a green, kind of a bright, vivid green, and the right one to be a very bright, vivid blue, and hit OK. So all that looks good. Now all I want you to do is come down and the goal is that I really want this sphere eventually to hit right at the very bottom of my frame. And then eventually, since there is elasticity in this ball, which is why it can bounce, it's the physics of it, and you do have to understand a little bit of physics to do a proper animation. And Walt Disney was one of the first ones that came up with a lot of this. If it's got elasticity to bounce, as it hits the bottom, there will be some give, so the ball will squish a little bit and then expand back up as it bounces to the top. Squish and expand, squish and expand as it bounces. To be 100% realistic, the bounce would get smaller and we would kind of adjust that in a much longer timeline. But what I want to do is just go ahead and get it set up to be able to do that later on. So I'm going to open up Transform and I want to mess with the anchor point. I do not want to set a keyframe for it. So I have no keyframes. I just want to adjust the anchor point across the board. And what I want it to do is right at 1 second, I want the anchor point to be right at the bottom of the sphere. So maybe you don't know if it's the X or the Y because that one's going to move it sideways. So I'm going to say no, and this one's going to move it up and down. What I want to do is then just kind of zoom in and make sure you're getting this pretty close so that the very bottom of the circle is hitting the anchor point. So now what this does is it actually then at 1 second is going to pull it off of our frame or out of our frame. So I want to adjust the position of this one single keyframe. The easiest way to do that is to just make sure I'm again at 1 second and then I have this keyframe selected, and then I'm going to adjust just the Y value, not the X value, just the Y value so that the sphere touches the very bottom of my screen. Now as I back up, what I can see is that if I scroll across this timeline, now my ball bounces, hits the bottom, and bounces back up. Awesome. This is where you're going to save, and you're going to render this out and give it to me at this point in the animation. What we'll do next week is we'll add a little bit of a squish to the scale of the animation. We'll even add some blur and some ease into the animation because as it bounces off the ground, it should be a little faster. As it approaches this top point, it should definitely be slower. So we'll probably put an easy ease up at this very top point. So it eases in and then eases out and goes back down. a little bit faster. So good job at this point. Make sure that you save and render this part of the animation. You'll be turning it in for a grade.